Hello everybody, welcome back. In the previous few videos, we have been covering the modeling toolkit. In this video, we're going to take a step back and look at lights, cameras, and render settings some more. Let's go ahead and just create a quick scene. Okay, and let's go ahead and just render this real fast. Rendering the current frame. Oh, we're in Arnold render view, so let's actually go ahead and take care of that first. You may recall from week 2, the default renderer is going to be the Arnold renderer if you had this installed. In order to have everyone on the same playing field, we don't really know how strong or weak everyone's particular machines are going to be. So we're just going to be using Maya software, at least for now. I'll be showing Arnold renderer later down the line, some basic stuff with it, but for the most part, we're going to be using Maya software whenever we want to render stuff. So now let's go ahead and render this. There we go. Fantastic. I am going to go ahead and actually keep this image as a reference point for future stuff that we do. I actually have this previous one from a previous attempt at recording this video. I'm going to go ahead and just actually get rid of this image because we don't need that one anymore. So now we just have this image that I just created right now, and this is going to be our control starting point that we compare all of our future advancements to. So let's go ahead and minimize that. Let's begin by creating a light. There's a few ways of doing that, two main ways of doing that. You can go to Create, Lights, and select the light here, or we can go into the rendering shelf and you have your light options here. I'd recommend we start first with Create since we can actually see the names here. And let's pick a spotlight first. As you can see, nothing has happened yet, and this is actually a good opportunity for us to review a few shortcuts for the viewport. 4 gives us our wireframe shaded view. 5 gives us our default view that we're in right now and have been in most of the time. 6 applies any textures. I'm going to press 6. I'm going to go ahead and just turn that off just by clicking up here where textured is. And 7 turns on our lights. Right now, the light doesn't look that good because the spotlight is not pointing towards anything. We can go ahead and manipulate the spotlight like we could any primitive. But I would absolutely recommend the best way of manipulating your spotlight is actually via going up to Panels, looking through Selected. Make sure you have the spotlight selected and you look through Selected. And this gives you an opportunity to move your spotlight around like a movie camera. Gives you a little bit more control over what's going on. And once you're done looking through here, and once you're happy with the positioning, which I think I am, you can go ahead and go back to Panels, Perspective, click on Persp, because this is our default view. Persp is our default view. All right, pretty good. Let's go ahead and render this and just see what we have so far. Yeah. And advancement from this, though you'll notice a issue right away that we can't see our shadows. We'll take care of that in a second, but first let's go over some of the other lights that we have here. We have ambient lights, which we'll get to in a little bit. We have directional lights, which is sunlight. Spotlights are, as the name implies, spotlights. Directional lights is essentially a form of sunlight you can add to a scene. So imagine an invisible sun off in the distance, shining light in a particular direction, whichever direction that I happen to be rotating this in. That is how directional lights essentially work. And they're very great for outdoor scenes, especially. Whereas interior stuff, maybe you're going to want to add some spotlights if you actually have light sources. If you don't have any visible light sources in a scene, then directional light is going to be the way to go. Of course, for demonstration purposes, we're going to be using the spotlight. Another kind of light that we have here are point lights. This is another kind of light that requires you model some sort of a source in the scene so that the light can look like it's coming from somewhere. It's just a smaller, little point light, like the kind of thing you would see in a museum. You can make multiple lights if you want. Make it really bright. Make it really bright. You can have multiple spotlights and multiple point lights in a scene, whereas with the directional light, again, the sunlight, it's a good idea to only ever have one of these in a scene at a time. Same for ambient light when we get to that in a little bit. All right, let's discuss shadows. Let's also discuss these icons up here. We've already gone over them before, but these icons are the same thing as the shortcuts. So 4 is wireframe, which is right here. 5 is this default shaded view, which is right here. 6 is textured, which is right here. Wireframe on shaded doesn't have a shortcut, but you can turn that on from here. This is where you can activate your lights, just as you could by pressing 7 on the keyboard. And this right here is where you activate shadows. But you can also activate shadows by going to lighting and check off shadows right here. So excellent. We have shadows. We can turn them off from this icon too if we wanted to and turn them back on. Fantastic. I'm going to move my plane so we can see our whole shadow here. Great. Let's go ahead and go to render and take a look at our scene. Uh-oh, you'll notice that we don't have the shadow in the render, but we have it in the viewport. What is going on? We need to go into the attribute editor for our light. So we have our light selected. Let's go into our attribute editor. We have some options we can play with here and manipulate immediately. We have the color, which I will play around with. I have some presets here from the previous time I attempted to record this. I'm going to pick one of them, actually. This undersea one I really liked. And we can also play with the intensity if you wanted to. Make it dimmer or brighter. I'll make it a little brighter, just for the purposes of the demo. And here is the important thing. We have shadows. We can play with the shadow color, but first we have to check off depth map shadows. This is what's going to actually allow these shadows to show up in the render. So we check this off. We can change the resolution. You can keep it at 512 if you want to. As you can see, it's pretty rough if you look at it from up close. So I'm going to boost it up to 2K, 2048. And that'll soften it up quite a bit. Let's go ahead and render this. Now our shadows show up. Perfect. We can continue playing with more settings here, including the filter. The filter further softens our shadows, as you can see. We'll just keep it at 3. We can play around with the cone angle. Makes our angle smaller or larger if we wanted to. I'll make it smaller for something interesting. The penumbra angle will soften the edges of our spotlight. I think I'll do. There we go. Let's render again. Not bad. Very quick, while we're on the subject of shortcuts, every time I mention a number key shortcut, such as 3 for smooth preview, 4 for wireframe shading mode, 5 for default shading mode, I am using the keyboard that is on top of all the letters, but note if you have a number pad on your keyboard, you can also use the number pad as well. As long as the number pad is turned on, then all of the key shortcuts that I've been giving you, like 3 for smooth preview, 4 for the wireframe, shaded, 5 for shaded mode, 6 for texture mode, which is irrelevant at this moment, 7 for lights, all of that will work on a number pad as well. Now, one thing I noticed from the most recent render is the fact that the shadows seem a little bit too dark for my liking. And if we were working with Arnold Renderer, Arnold will be able to handle the bouncing light itself. But for our purposes, we're going to have to fake that since we're working with Maya software, as you can see up here. So we're going to add in an ambient light to do so. I suspect it's not going to play nicely with me because the last time I tested this, it didn't. But let's just see what happens. We have an ambient light here. I'm going to go ahead and just lower the intensity to 0.1. So we get something softer that can sort of bounce light. Like that. Let's see what happens if I render this now. Yeah, I'm seeing that it's all dark. Okay, that's fine. So what we can do in this situation is go up to rendering menu, not the modeling menu that we've been in for a little while now, but the rendering menu. We want to go into Windows, Relationship Editors, Light Linking, Light Centric. And this is going to let us... This basically tells the Maya lights what the light is going to affect. So in this case, the spotlight affects everything in the scene. The ambient light is affecting everything in the scene. But let's actually make it so that the ambient light only affects the plane. And let's see what happens if I render now. That's better. That's better. That's more what I'm looking for. That's nice. Very good. This is a useful menu to know, especially if you're working with multiple lights in a scene. I would recommend playing around with this every now and again. This relationship editor for light linking, which again is just in Windows, relationship editors, light linking, light centric, and then just decide here what your lights are going to be affecting. Most of the time you want your lights to affect everything, but every now and again you're going to play with something like an ambient light, which doesn't play all that well with lots of stuff in Maya, so you're going to want to be more picky and choosy about what about how the ambient light affects the scene as compared to something like a spotlight or a directional light. All right, so we have our ambient light. That's great. Let's go back to our render settings now. Because we've been creating images again and again and again, we'll just make another one, that are 960 by 540. This is what you made for your first homework assignment, for your first real homework assignment. This is the default size for Maya software rendering, but we can make it bigger. We can make it better. We can make it the standard. So if you scroll down, past file output, we can discuss how this works later. Past frame range, past renderable cameras, but renderable cameras is interesting because you can actually choose if you want this to render from the front orthographic camera, the side orthographic camera, the top orthographic camera, if you want to create your own camera, or if you just want to use the basic perspective camera. For most of the time you'll be doing this, you're going to be using the basic perspective camera, but just understand that you can create or use the other orthographic views, the other orthographic panels if you wanted to. Anyway, the main area we want to take a look at right now is image size. Right now our preset is HD 540, which is 960 by 540. I would recommend you push this up to HD 1080, which is the standard 1920 by 1080 HD size. Most machines can't handle that. I'm going to expect that you will make an effort to ensure that your renders are of the appropriate HD size, since I would assume you want your renders to be, nice and visible and not just small little images that only take up a corner of the screen. So perfect. Let's go ahead and close that. Let's go ahead and just test real quick and make sure we are rendering at 1920 by 1080. We absolutely are, as we can see right now. Perfect. Compared to the previous images, which are 960 by 540, already we can see this is a massive improvement and a massive difference. This is going to be the real difference maker for your renders, making sure you render at the appropriate dimensions and pixel size, which is 1920 by 1080. You can decide if you want to make your images, your renders 2K or 4K or 8K or anything like that, but for the most part, I'm going to be asking for standard HD, which is 1920 by 1080. Okay, next, let's go into our viewport title bar, which is up here. We will notice that we have something called film gate right here. We also have something right next to it called a resolution gate. Let's go ahead and select resolution gate, and this is going to give us a little gate that will tell us where the render is actually going to take place in. So if we zoom in like this, we will see that the actual render will render accordingly to that size, with the cube being somewhat cut off, as you can see. Perfect. Let's go ahead and do that. We can also select film gate right here. But I would recommend most of the time you just select resolution gate. Resolution gate gives you all the information you need, so just resolution gate right here will be enough. You can also select this to turn off the gate mask if you wanted to, but I like to keep it on. It just makes it more obvious what is going to be rendered and what will not be rendered. We can play around with our settings here by selecting the perspective camera and entering the attribute editor for it. So let's reveal, or let's Shift H to show. There we go. Shift H to show this in the outliner. This gives us our options for our camera in the attribute editor, which is great. So we can go ahead and start taking a look at what we have here for camera settings. Display option is going to be what we want. We can see we can display our film gate here, display the resolution, which we just clicked in up here, display the gate mask, which we just clicked up here, control the opacity of the gate mask if we wanted to. I'll keep it at 0.7. Change the color of it if we want to. This may be useful to you, changing the color of it. Something else we can do is enter the environment attribute editor here. The standard background is always going to be black, but we can change this to any color that we want. So let's make it purple, light purple, like that. And let's render and see what we get. Not bad. Next thing we can do is enter our hypershade real quick. Let's go ahead and enter our hypershade. we have an option here to create a material called use background. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's go ahead and just apply this use background to our plane and see what happens. Our plane disappears, but our shadow is still there, which is important because if we undo what we just did and just delete the plane fully, we will see that the cube is now just floating out in space and there is nothing to cast its shadow on. But however, we have our, let's undo to get our plane back, and let's add in that use background material that we created. Just drag that in. Our plane disappears, but it's still considered to be existing, and thus we still have something to cast a shadow on for a cube, which is great, because that means that we can render and we can get something like this. One more thing we can do is add in our own images for a render background. So under environment, instead of just changing the background color, we can just create an image plane. And here where it says image name, we click on the file folder. And we just track down. I have a space background for this just to test. There we go. Under placement, we can go ahead and change this around if we want to fill, or best, or horizontal, or vertical, or to size. What your fit is going to be will depend more on the actual size of your images. This is a pretty big image, so best is fine. It fits in basically perfectly. But you would change this depending on what kind of image you're working with, how large that image actually is. Let's go ahead and render it. Let's go ahead and actually save this so we can go over some stuff regarding saving now. So File, Save Image. Just like it was explained before, you want to make sure you don't select raw image. For the purposes of our demo, I am actually going to select raw image. And I'm also going to make sure I select JPEG here. We'll discuss why JPEGs in a second. This is going to be SpaceCube1 raw. I'm going to save. And then I'm also going to save again, but this time I'm going to do it the proper way with color managed image. SpaceCube to CMI. Okay, so the raw image, as you will see, is much darker than it should be, whereas the color managed image is the appropriate brightness. So you don't ever want to select raw image. If you select it by accident, you're going to get stuff that's darker than it should be, whereas color managed image is more appropriate to what it actually should be. If you find that even the color managed image is not as bright or as appropriately lighted as you want to, you can go ahead and play with these two sliders. We have the exposure slider and the gamma slider here to play around with these some more, to play around with the lighting some more if you wanted to create something very specific. Like that. Why not? I'll go ahead and save this. SpaceCube 3. No special name afterwards, just save that. My images. And there we have something that's more fine-tuned to what I wanted it to be. Something to keep note of, though, you will notice that we used the use background material for this plane. Because we used the use background material for this plane, you must make sure that when you render as a JPEG and not a PNG. So let's go ahead and render this again so we can demonstrate what happens if I render this as a PNG. I want to render. I go to my old reliable, which is PNGs. I'll save it, images, and we will see what happened here. Because I made it a PNG, the transparency didn't apply. So the use background is not it's not working as it should, and the plane is showing up incorrectly when I didn't want it to. So anytime you use the use background material on something like a plane, you want to make sure you save as a JPEG and not a PNG, otherwise you will have the plane show up in your render, which you probably don't want it to. Okay, that's all I have for you this week. What I'm going to do now is just going to do a very quick run through of all that camera stuff that we did, but faster and with my own model now, just to have a nice just to create something nice for myself. The next video, I am going to be putting all of this stuff together in a demo of your next big assignment. So look forward to that. Until then, however, I will see you all next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.